So there's different sets of rules for different size companies. The main cutoff is at the 100-person and 500-person level. If you're under 100 total employees considered for an aggregate of your 2020 and 2019 employee count comparative to the same quarters in 2019, then you would be considered either under 100 employees or over 100 employees, which is the definition for small or large for the first year, the 2020 tax year, for the ERTC. Though then in 2021, that rule set is increased to include employers that are considered small employers at the under 500-person headcount level. So any employer at all that is from one W-2 employee all the way to 99 W-2 employees would be considered a small employer for 2020. And then all the way from 1 to 499 would be considered a small employer for 2021. Large employers, for the employers that exceed those thresholds, they are still able to claim ERTC, though the way the ERTC is determined and the wages that the ERTC is based off of is no longer the same rule set as applied to the companies that are under that size.
On qualifying for it, I know specifically because I've been asked so much. Originally, it was a revenue decline, right?
Right. And that's speaking a little bit to what you were mentioning before about why so many companies had received advice that they weren't eligible at this time or weren't eligible at the time they sought that advice. So the original rule set prescribed that you had to have a specific decline in gross receipts. You had to have either 50% decline in 2020 or 20% decline in 2021 compared to the same quarters in 2019. And if you did not experience that very specific decline in gross receipts, then gross receipt revenue, then you would not become eligible for this particular credit. There were a bunch of other disqualifying factors too. Originally, the rule set said that if you received a PPP, you were not eligible for the ERTC, though that was that particular rule was walked back. Additionally, if you received certain federal credits like EIDL, et cetera, you were not eligible to claim the credit, though that's no longer the case. The reason for that is because when they established that rule set in 2020, the reason it's called the Employee Retention Tax Credit was because it was a credit you could claim live in 2020 or 2021 for your taxes for those particular years. Though many businesses did not access this credit or did not meet the very specific threshold. So a business that had experienced a 45% decrease in gross receipts for whatever reason was not eligible. They didn't design it with a graduating scale. There was no thresholds along the way. It was either a black and white, you met the threshold or you did not meet the threshold and therefore you were eligible. Though when the administrations changed over, the SBA, the IRS, they reestablished the rules to include more businesses. Not enough businesses had accessed the credit, or from their perception, not enough businesses had accessed the credit, so they increased the eligibility criteria to include other factors for businesses to become eligible through. So if you were eligible through gross receipts, great. That is one way to become eligible at this point in time, but now it's not the only way. So the main way that businesses that are not gross receipts eligible become eligible for this credit at this time is through demonstration of impact because of the pandemic, and that's established through demonstrating impact via governmental order compliance and/or impact because of governmental orders. Specifically, it's defined as a partial suspension of business operations, and that partial suspension of business operations has a very large definition group for what different impacts could be considered as ways to impact the business. The SBA, the IRS looked at it on a more holistic level and said, well, there's a whole bunch of diverse ways businesses could be impacted, and gross receipts doesn't exactly tell the whole story on a business.